name's Amanda Perry-Kessaris. I'm going to tell you about the course Multinational Enterprises and the Law, which is a course that I wrote. Multinational Enterprises and the Law is a course that explores the relationship between multinational enterprises, or MNEs, as we'll call them from now on, and the law. It does this from two perspectives. One is to think about the impact of the law on multinational enterprises, and the other is to think about the impact of multinational enterprises on the law. We'll consider these two relationships of the multinational enterprises and the law, and the impact of the law on multinational enterprises, from the perspectives of three different parties: from governments, from civil society actors, and from multinational enterprises themselves. Multinational enterprises take many forms. They can be, for example, in the form of companies or partnerships that are located in different countries. But the important point for us to remember is that they are linked together in various ways. So, for example, they may be linked together by share ownership, or they may be linked together by contracts, or they may be linked together in a more informal way. But the important point from our perspective is that they can somehow control or influence the activities of each other. The most familiar form of multinational enterprise is the multinational corporation. So if you think about Starbucks, for example, or Apple are some key examples. And these are groups of companies that, again, live in different countries and under the rules of those different countries, but are able to influence each other's activities. Multinational enterprises are the subject of deeply divided opinion. They play an increasingly important role in the economies, in the political structures, and in the cultures of countries around the world. And whether you think that they act for good or for other purposes is a matter of opinion in some cases, and certainly a matter of the perspective of the commentator. And this course seeks to cover all sorts of perspectives. Section A explores multinational enterprises in context, and this is the largest part of the course because it covers material to which the rest of the course refers back. When thinking about the context within which multinational enterprises operate, we need to think about it from political, economic, social perspectives. The idea is to focus on the role of multinational enterprises in the wider world. We begin by examining globalization processes. These are processes which have both created multinational enterprises and which, to a degree, have been created by multinational enterprises. So MNEs are a cause and an effect of globalization. We then try to place multinational enterprises in their proper legal context, and we do this by looking at two key areas of law. The first is company law, and the second is international law. The latter is, of course, important because multinational enterprises operate on an international level. We then move to consider multinational enterprises in their proper socio-political and economic context. Having set out the context within which multinational enterprises exist, we then try to explore, in the second half of Section A, the interactions between multinational enterprises and those contexts. First, we look at the role of legal systems as a factor that might determine the location of foreign direct investors, some of which will be multinational enterprises. We then look at the importance of culture as a factor that might determine the perceptions and expectations that multinational enterprises have of different kinds of legal systems. And finally, we look at the impact that multinational enterprises might have on the legal system itself in a country. In Section B, which is entitled National Regulation of Multinational Enterprises, we turn our attention to the ways in which states regulate multinational enterprises. So much more focus on the regulatory relationship between states and multinational enterprises. We look at the complex issues associated with trying to maintain a balance for the state between trying to attract a multinational enterprise but also trying to control its behavior. We then consider a number of aspects of jurisdiction that are made more complicated by the structure of multinational enterprises. We then consider special problems of liability, both with respect to the group of multinational enterprises and with respect to components within the multinational enterprise that are created by the structure of multinational enterprises. In Section C, the international protection and regulation of multinational enterprises, we consider the rather fragmented collection of standards and laws that are used both by states to regulate multinational enterprises and by multinational enterprises to protect themselves. First, we divide those standards into the broad categories of multilateral and bilateral. We then move to consider in some more depth some of the specific issues that are covered by those international standards. So, for example, dispute resolution. In Section D, Fields of Concern, we move on to consider particular issues that are regarded as specifically important or of particular concern that are raised by multinational enterprises. We consider, for example, corruption, taxation, human rights, and so on. Of course, there's many issues that we could have considered covering in that section, This is just intended to be a representative selection. So those are the 4 sections that the course covers, and we'll go into those in more detail in another video.